Hi and welcome into the trickiest chess opening of all times. This is the gangster chess opening of today. No one is safe when the Rousseau Gambit hits the stage. And if you aren't scared by this time, let's dig right into it. The good news is you get the Rousseau Gambit out of the most common opening sequence. Pawn e4, pawn e5, knight f3, attacking the pawn, knight c6, bishop c4. They're hoping for the Italian game or the two knights game, but you instead shock your opponents by playing the seemingly old move pawn to f5. Kind of like the Vienna Gambit or the King's Gambit with reverse color, and it isn't a lot of fun to play this bad boy. There are traps for white all along the way, literally at every turn. And in today's video, I'd love to share with you top 3 of my favorite opening traps within the Rousseau Gambit. Okay, so the most common opening line here is for white to accept this pawn sacrifice, pawn takes f5, and it is actually already wrong, but most of your opponents aren't aware of it. So pawn takes, that allows you to push your own pawn forward, chasing this knight away, and in most of the cases your opponents will be confused because they'll figure out that your knight is controlling these squares, your queen is controlling those squares along this diagonal, and they'll be forced to play the knight all the way back to g1. Now, in my first video that I recorded about the Rousseau Gambit that got almost even over 1 million views, I think, I recommended the move knight to f6, and it is indeed the simplest way for black to get an advantage here. But today I want to share with you one more line, which is slightly more complicated, but it's actually even trickier for white. This is when you play the move pawn to d5, attacking this bishop right away, and also opening up for your own bishop to go forward and capture this pawn, get it back. Now, what's the problem with this move? Well, it allows white to play this nasty check queen to h5. It's one of the main things you gotta keep in mind while playing the Rousseau Gambit is that potentially in some variations your pawn is ready to start attacking you that way. Usually it's not all that dangerous really, because you can just move your king away, and notice that really white only has a single queen in their attack, which simply does not give enough firepower for their attack to turn into something real. Anyway, right now they have to move their bishop away, so they play something like bishop e3, and now you start gaining tempos by attacking this exposed queen. So you play knight to f6, aiming to kick this queen away, and as it moves away you can then get your pawn back on f5. Very often your opponents will try to hold on to this pawn, and for that reason they're going to play queen to g5, still looks scary. The queen looks at your king, defends this pawn, looks good. But you keep chasing the queen, you play pawn h6, now, if the queen wants to keep defending this pawn, the only square available is queen to g6, but your opponents are still eagerly waiting for their queen to move forward. They hope that they're going to somehow create some checkmating threats for your king. But then you continue, you play knight to d4, and this is the most precise way of playing here. Now white has a hard time defending this pawn. Notice that you attack it twice. So your plan here would be to capture this pawn, which would drive this queen away, all the way back to g3, and after that you can easily move your king to f7, to a more normal square, and then you're good to go, right? You can move your dark squared bishop out to d6, and life's good. Now in that case, black is simply gaining the upper hand, but your opponent is likely to keep insisting on securing this pawn on f5 by playing pawn to g4, and now looks like there is no way for you to attack this pawn anymore. But you instead play a silent killer move bishop to d7. What's the point? Well, after almost any move of white, for example if they play c3 or whatever, basically your idea is just to play another silent move bishop to e8, and that actually captures the queen as it is trapped on g6. And you could play this move right away, but if you want to save your knight, you can first trade it off over here on b3, and then you play bishop e8. Now the queen is trapped, and you just win. The second trap is one of my favorites in the Rousseau Gambit. Looking at this move pawn to f5, your opponents are likely to think that this is something dubious, something unsound, and they're going to punish you for playing this bad move. Little do they know, because in one of the most common variations of the Rousseau Gambit, this f5 pawn is going to be promoted into a new queen and is going to checkmate white. Can you believe that? Your opponents certainly don't expect this to happen, but let me show you how you can achieve just that. The second most common move here is by playing pawn to d3 just to defend this pawn on e4. Then you play bishop to c5, putting your own bishop to this active forward position. And now that actually provokes white to start attacking you by going knight to g5. And it looks like white found the way to punish you for this early aggression f5. And now, thanks to the support of this bishop, they can possibly play bishop to f7, start taking your king, or maybe they're going to play knight to f7 with a fork to your queen and rook, and it looks like there is no convenient way to defend this square anyway, but you just play pawn to f4. You move this pawn forward, and it also cuts off this white's dark square bishop. It no longer defends the knight, therefore it is attacked by your queen. Now, but white is actually happy. They were going to play knight f7 anyway, so they think that you keep playing weird moves and they're just winning. Knight f7 attacks the queen, attacks the rook here, so white is happy. But you bring your queen all the way forward to h4, creating this color's checkmate threat. And if your opponent is bright enough to notice that, they're going to defend against it somehow. In that first video about the Rousseau Gambit that I've already mentioned, I showed you how you can win if white castles, okay? But then a lot of people ask me in comments that it's all good, but what if my opponent plays pawn to g3? I'm not sure how to attack in that case. So I decided to cover this line as well, and actually it's just a lot of fun. So after pawn to g3, you just move your queen forward. You definitely want to go forward because you want to keep attacking. And from here, your queen is ready in some variations to penetrate into g2, to hit the rook, to hit this pawn on f2. We've got the bishop over here as well. So your attack starts getting real. Your opponent will probably just lightheartedly capture this rook on h8 anyway. And here you play another key move, pawn to d5. You once again sacrifice material, and what's the point? Well, the point is you just want to play this move with a tempo, because that also gets your bishop involved into your attack, and you're ready to play it out to g4, hit the queen, and bring one more attacker to make your attack even stronger. After pawn d5, they're usually going to capture it, and then you do play bishop to g4, attacking the queen. If the queen moves, one of the really annoying things for white is that you can then jump with your knight to d4, and after that to f3, and pretty much all of your pieces come together against white's king, and this is deadly. But of course, it looks better for white to play pawn to f3, hoping that it gives them some tempo by attacking your bishop, but we're not going to retreat. We're going to play pawn takes g3, making use of our Rousseau pawn. Notice how it's getting forward all along the way. Okay, it's already reached the third rank. White cannot recapture, because that would hand this rook on h1, so the pawn is pinned down to the rook. And if they play any other move, for example, they capture a bishop on g4, now instead of capturing over here, there is obviously a lot stronger move, pawn to g2. And notice that there is no way for white to save this rook. Okay, we're going to capture it and promote a new queen. The rook cannot go to g1, well, it can, but it will be captured immediately, and it doesn't stop your pawn from moving forward after that anyway. So white is just losing this game in this spectacular fashion, and your pawn f7, which was one of the weakest pawns of black in many openings, white is aiming to attack that weak pawn on f7, but in this case, it turned on this beast mode and just completely defeated white. And here comes the third trap in the Rousseau Gambit. Here, after you just played pawn to f5, the appropriate move of white is pawn to d4, striking back in the center. So let's say they're going to play pawn to d4, and not many of your opponents will find this move because it's more of an advanced level stuff. But anyway, let's say you're coming across some stronger opponent. What are you going to do in this case? Well, the correct move of black is pawn takes d4 over here, and that's what I've covered in another video. You may check it out if you wish. So that is an appropriate way for black. But I've just come to realize that there is another move which is actually much trickier, and this is a move pawn takes e4. In this case, if you're willing to accept some level of risk, that's going to bring you a lot of victories. Knight takes e5, well, it's going to bring you some losses as well, but that's going to be not as frequent as you gaining victories with this. So after knight takes e5, you know, it looks good for white, of course. They're already targeting this weakness on f7. So you play pawn to d5, attacking this bishop. And here's the trap. We are baiting white into playing queen h5 check, attacking your king, because it looks very lucrative for white. It looks completely winning. It looks like white is almost, you know, delivering the scholar's checkmate to you, you know, after queen to f7. And that's why many of your opponents will play that move. Now, just to be clear, the correct move of white would be just to move that bishop away from c4. But queen h5 again is very tempting. As you play pawn to g6, trying to push it back, your opponent will be happy to finally sacrifice knight takes g6. It's a standard tactical idea anyway, in many openings, so it's easy for white to notice this. And the idea is that this pawn is pinned down to the rook. So if you recapture here, you grab the knight, they grab the rook, they win. But instead, you play a smaller move, knight to f6, which is a counterattack to the queen. Now, white needs to really keep their queen along the h-file, because if not, the pin will no longer be pinned and you will just grab this one on g6. Therefore, they're forced to play queen to h4, maintaining this pin along the h-file. And now you play another cool move, knight takes d4. Right now, the position may look very complicated, and you may be a little bit turned off by that, you know, massy position on the board. But let's not forget that your opponent is equally confused, but we will clear your confusion within a few minutes, and after that, you will know how to play properly and how to win. So what's the situation here? Well, first of all, let's just slow down and comprehend what's going on. Right now, the material balance is equal. white is attacking your rook, that's true, but you're also attacking a lot. You're threatening knight to take c2, check to the king. After that, you're going to win the rook just as well. Besides that, you're also attacking this bishop on c4. Therefore, while white has just one threat to grab your rook, you've got a threat to attack his king, to attack the rook, to attack the bishop, and that's how you overpower white, basically. Okay, so here white has two main options. One of them is to play bishop b3, which looks like a smart move to play, because it defends both the bishop as well as the pawn on c2, and here you play a brilliant maneuver that wins the game. It is very rare that you can move your knight, just keep moving it back and win the game by doing so, but in this position that is the case. So I've told you initially that Rousseau Gambit is extremely tricky and is just one of those examples. So you start the weird maneuver of this knight, and you move it back from d4 to f5 initially, hitting the queen. Once again, our idea is just to shift the queen to push it off the h-file, because if it moves away, you're then free to grab the knight without worrying about your rook being lost. So if white tries to keep his queen on the h-file, then you play one more odd move. You keep moving your knight all the way back to e7, and while moving your knight to e7 when you're playing black is a very standard thing to do, but it is very rare that your opponent is going to resign after you play that move. So in this case, white should really resign. So what's the trick here? Well, this is actually discover attack of the queen, and also you're going to grab the knight. So that's how you win. You either grab the queen or the knight. If white moves the queen somewhere, doesn't really matter, let's say to c3, you then just pick up this knight, and now you are simply having an extra piece for free with no compensation at all. You're even having a more active position. Your king is completely safe. You're going to play bishop g7, castle kingside, and you have so many pieces around your king that you definitely have nothing to worry about. Again, this is just completely winning. That covers white playing bishop to b3. In that case, you win with this awkward maneuver of your knight all the way back to f5, e7, capturing this knight on g6. And what if white captures the rook on h8? In that case, we just couldn't be happier, because then you gladly capture this pawn on c2, which delivers check to the king, as well as it attacks the rook. And your plan on the next move, king just moves somewhere, to f1, then you first, grab the bishop, then you gobble up this rook on a1, and you end up with an extra piece. So that's how you win in that case. But many of your opponents will try to calculate variations, figure out that that's bad for them, and they'll wish to grab your knight, so they're going to play king to d1. So here their idea is that they're also attacking the knight. If you capture here, they capture the knight. But you're okay to go into this line. So you do capture the bishop, check to the king. Okay, well, I think, oh, cool. Now, not only I can grab this knight, but it no longer attacks my rook. And now I'm just having an extra rook in the game. What can be better than that? But then you just disappoint white with the checkmate in one move, queen to d3 checkmate. Again, you're highly likely to get this variation, and it is absurd, but playing these dubious openings somehow is so tricky that it is extremely complicated for your opponent to figure out the right way, but there are so many pitfalls that basically just making one little inaccuracy can cost them a game in a way just like this. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this opening, or if you ever had a chance to try it out and how it went for you. And I do know that some people will write me in comments that, Igor, you cannot become a strong player by playing tricky openings, and actually I perfectly agree with that. That's why I also have this free masterclass that teaches you positional chess, and I hope that you're gonna win either way. Anyway, wishing you a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.